All right, I will say good morning, or good tavach. It is a great schos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin another week of Talmud Torah together, especially again still in the afterglow of Shabbos Nachamu, Baruch Hashem. So today's daf is Nun Daled 54. We begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachim Av, the Tilson and Wall families from Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shuman Drashos this month, sending their love to us from Eretz Yisrael, and inviting us, Emirat Hashem, to come and join them. Halabai, we should be Zocha, Emirat Hashem, to do so. B'sha'a tova u'mitzlachas. Both sides, today's daf is Nundal 54. We are picking up Emirat Hashem on Gimel Beis 53b, and let's pick up Emirat Hashem last line of the Amud 53b, last line. I'm Rabbi Yomi Abira. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. So we are continuing Eretz Hashem in the halachos concerning chazaka. So the Gemara says as follows: Rabbi Yirmiyah B'Yirah sending Rabbi Yehuda, Hayman, this guy, the shada, top of 54, Nundal Aleph, the shada lifta beipili de ger. So we'll say, so remember again, we're speaking about over here in the interesting concept of nichse hager. Nichse hager means you have a convert, a person who converted. Now remember again, person converts, marries, has a family, okay, so he has inheritors. But let's say a person converts and he doesn't have a family, which is, remember, the convert could have a biological family, but doesn't necessarily have a halachic family. He passes away. There are no halachic relatives to inherit him. What is the status of his property? Hefker. Hefker. What happens with Hefker? Kalakodim zachaba. Whoever gets there first, whoever acquires it first, ultimately goes ahead and becomes the owner. So now, it's an interesting case over here. There was a guy, we'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain was walking by the property of a ger who had passed away. The ger, the convert, left no heirs. So what does Ruvain do? Interesting case over here. The shada lifta beipili. He takes a turnip, and he throws it into a crack into the ground. So there's like a cleft in the ground of the nichse hager. Ruvain throws in a turnip. Now the Rashbam points out over here, the shada lifta beipili shizara lefes besoch mikoim shel karka hager below kisa afar below asa klum. Now the thing to remember over here is, what does Ruvain do? Literally, we'll say what it says. He throws in turnip toss. It's a good lawn game, whatever. So he goes and he throws it in. It falls into the crack of the ground, and that's it. He doesn't cover it with earth. He doesn't do anything else. He just simply throws the turnip into the ground. What's the halacha? Lo havi chazaka. This is not a form of chazaka. What is chazaka? Now remember, we're using now chazaka in a different way. Up until now, we've been focusing on chazaka as that four-pronged manner of acquisition. Now, we'll say chazaka, we're kind of reverting back to the use of chazaka as we used it before we started cheskas habat in Basra. Now, what does chazaka mean? A proprietary act. A proprietary act, right? Something you go ahead and do to be demonstrative of ownership. So this throwing the turnip into the crack in the ground is not a chazaka, and therefore Ruvain does not become the owner of the land. So I'll say, so just to illustrate this a little bit more. So right, Ruvain's walking by, throws the turnip into the crack of the ground. Shimon comes along. What does Shimon do? Shimon erects a fence around the property. Who's the owner? Shimon, right? Ruvain threw a turnip into the ground. That's great. Throwing a turnip into the ground is not a form of acquisition. Shimon, who put up a fence, Shimon's going to be the owner. My time. What's the reason for this? So I'll say, remember again, now even if it turns out that over time what ends up happening with that turnip, the turnip grows into, I don't know, not a turnip, turnips just grow from the ground, like potatoes, right? Whatever. So even though, again, it turns into a turnip patch, I don't know if it's a technical term, right? Turns into a turnip patch, right? At the time that Ruvain threw the turnip into the crack into the ground, he didn't do anything. Nothing was affected, nothing was created, nothing was changed. Because of that, there is no chazaka. My time, the shada, at the time that Ruvain threw the turnip into the ground, there was no shevach, there was no improvement, there was no material change to the property. Hashtag the kashavach, memela kashavach, even though later on one turnip, K'nai Nahara, turns into a turnip patch, but that occurs later on, and we almost see that as occurring de facto. We see that as occurring on its own, not necessarily occurring as a result of Ruvain's actions. Okay, so we'll say, so therefore, what we're learning over here is that halacha l'maaseh, and this is bolstering what we've already known before, chazaka must be some type of proprietary act, but it has to be a proprietary act that is comprised of a unit of dynamic activity. You must be doing something to some way, somehow, quote unquote, change the land. Now you don't have to change. That's why putting up a fence is also considered a chazaka, but you have to do something that represents some form of dynamic activity representative of ownership. Amar Shmuel, next. Haiman de pashach dikla adaita de dikla kani, adaita de chiyusalo kani. This is an interesting case. If someone goes ahead and the Rashbam says pashach dikla, the Rashbam says kimo vayiv shechini notal minha anofim. So I'll say if you go over to a palm tree. So the same case, by the way, same case, right? Ger passes away, leaves no heirs, has a palm tree. I want to go ahead and acquire the palm tree. So how do I do this? So the Gemara says, if someone goes ahead and removes the branches for the sake of acquiring the palm tree, you could acquire the palm tree. Adaita dechiyusa, but if I'm just going ahead and taking branches from the palm tree to feed my animals, then ultimately lo kani. You do not acquire the palm tree. Right? So once you hear this, so sometimes removing the branches could be a form of acquisition, and sometimes removing the branches, if it's just to feed my animals, ultimately, let me say it differently. When I'm removing the branches for the benefit of the tree, that is a form of acquisition. When I'm removing the branches to feed my animals, that is not a form of acquisition. I asks the Gemara, hey chidami, how do you know? Isn't branch removal just branch removal? To says something very interesting. Shakla mehai gisa, adaita dedikla. Kula mechad gisa, adaita dechiyusa. This is very interesting. Apparently, when pruning a tree for the benefit of the tree, what do? You prune branches from all sides of the tree. Started the week with some arbitorial advice over here, right? So you go ahead and you prune the branches from all sides of the tree. If you're just feeding your animals, then I guess you just take whatever is immediately available. Incredible. I'll say, by the way, this is also like, if you think about this, so therefore again, halacha l'maisa, Reuven wants to acquire the tree of the deceased ger. If he's going ahead and pruning from all around, that's demonstrative, that's an active acquisition, active ownership, he becomes the owner. Just takes a couple of branches here, a couple of branches there, that's for his animal. We'll say, if you think about this also, just in the realm of a tree, right? Tree is always representative, metaphorically, of Eitz Chaim Hilamach Hazikim Ba. A tree is representative of Torah. So if a person, there are two ways in which you could consume Torah. You could take a little here, you could take a little there, and it's very nice. The problem just is, it does not necessarily contribute to a comprehensive Torah identity. But if you take pieces from all sides of the tree, right? If you make sure to take branches from all parts of the tree, a person creates a well-balanced diet of spirituality, which means a person has Gemara, a person has Mishnah, a person has Halacha, a person has Shtayim Mikra, a person has Chasidus, a person has Musar, a person has Chesed, a person gives Tzedakah, a person does Maisim Tovim. If you take from all parts of the tree, then ultimately, again, that's how you acquire it. You just take a little bit here, a little bit there. It's very nice. It could be a form of sustenance, but you don't acquire it. You want Ruchnius, you want the tree of Torah, you want the tree of Yiddishkeit, you have to make sure to take branches from all sides, creating for yourself a well-balanced spiritual diet, which leads to a well-balanced spiritual identity. So the Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Shmuel, Haiman, dezochi zichye adaita da'ar, sorry, Haiman, dezochi zichye. All right, what's this, dezochi zichye? Look at the Rashbam. So this is a person who's literally going ahead and literally translated is sweeping his field. He's sweeping his field. Now, again, it's not my field. Well, again, remember, all of these cases is I've stumbled upon a field of hefker. Now, by the way, I will say it doesn't have to be nichse ger, right? The property of the ger. It's hefker case. So whatever you could fill in whatever hefker narrative you would like. The Gemara is using property of a ger because it's the easiest one to just imagine. So now I'm walking by a field that's hefker. I want to acquire it. How do I go ahead? What do I do to perform chazakah? I begin to sweep it. So the Gemara says, "Hi man, the zachi zichye, adaita the arakani, adaita the tzivi lokani." So again, if I'm sweeping it for the purpose of acquiring the land, then halacha l'maisa, it works. But if I'm just going ahead and sweeping it in order to acquire twigs for my fire, then it doesn't work. That's not the That's not demonstrative of ownership. So in other words, you see the common theme. An active chazaka has to somehow be of benefit in totality to the item you're acquiring, as opposed to providing some type of episodic benefit for you. So the act of clearing debris, clearing twigs away from a field, is of benefit to the field. So if you're doing it for the field, that's a form of chazaka. If you're just doing it because you want twigs, right? You're making a nice fire by the fireplace, you want twigs, that's not an act of chazaka. So the Gemara says, hey chidami, well, how do you know? Just by looking at the act, how do you know what the person's intention is? I'll say, it's so interesting. It's so interesting that we spend so much of life trying not to read people's intentions into their actions. Right? Someone does something, someone says something, so we try to condition ourselves to be dan lekaf sechos, even though their action looked a certain way, and even though what they said really sounded a certain way, we condition ourselves, benefit of the doubt. It's fascinating over here, I will say that in halachic discipline, it's just the opposite, right? Over here, what we're saying is, well, I want to understand exactly what their intention is from their action. So now I see Ruvain got to the Nichse Hager before I got there. I see him sweeping up. What happens? I'm looking to see, I will say now, if I walk by, what am I looking to see? Or what am I interested in? I'm interested in acquiring that field before Reuben acquires that field. The problem is Reuben's already sweeping. So now the Gemara says, well, sweeping could be a form of chazaka, but only if it's a type of sweeping done for the benefit of the land. So I'm looking at Reuben saying, is he sweeping for the benefit of the land, or is he sweeping just to acquire twigs? And that makes a world of difference for me, because if it's for the land, then he's the proud new owner of a field. If he's just sweeping for twigs, then Lamais again, I could swoop in and acquire it. So hey chidami, how do you know which is which? So the Gemara says, Shaka Rav Ravi Vizutri Adaita Da'ara. If he sweeps away big twigs and little twigs, then that shows that he's doing it for the purpose of clearing the field, and therefore, again, that is an act of chazaka. Shako Ravravi v'shavak zutri. But if he just takes the big twigs, the big branches, which are good for firewood, and leaves behind the small ones, right, v'shavik zutri adaita ditzivi. Then it's clear that the reason he's clearing the field is why? Not to acquire the field, but rather to acquire firewood. So again, Basra teaches you that you could absolutely glean a person's intentions from their actions, and in life, it is so important not to jump to conclusions about people's intentions by looking at their actions. Okay, this incredible dialectic. Rabbi Shmuel, next. Haiman de Oskil Tikla. Another interesting case over here. So we'll say all the same case, right? Ruvain goes ahead and comes to Nichse Hager. The Ger passed away, left no Yershim, no inheritors. Now Ruvain's trying to acquire it. How does he acquire it? The Askil Tikla. Rashbam says over here, Asal Tikla Masir HaMechsholos Umasha Pnei Karka Shetei Chalaka V'lo Tikasha Macharisha V'tishaber. So what does he do? Smooths out the land. Smooths out the lands, right? So let's say on this field, there are hills, or we'll call it mounds, and then there are depressions. Thank you. Depressions, right? Mounds and depressions. So now what is he doing? So Reuven is smoothing out the land. So is that a chazaka? So the Gemara says it depends. Adaita da'ara kani. Adaita debeidiri lo kani. If he's clearing the land for the sake of the land, then ultimately that is an act of acquisition. But the Maisa again, sometimes I will say a person not clears. If he smooths it out for the benefit of the land, then that's a chazaka. If he smooths it out, this is very interesting, in order to make it, that Rashbam points out, a temporary threshing floor. See, here's what's interesting. If you want to thresh, this is good to know, it's a long Sunday, right? If you want to thresh, right, so Lamaisa, what you need is flat land. So what do you do if I want to go ahead, I have a field, and I want, so a permanent threshing floor would be completely flat. But let's say again, I don't have a permanent threshing floor. I want to utilize a piece of field. So what would you do? You would just go out of your way to flatten the area as best as you could. Again, not permanently, but enough to get the job done. So the Gemara says like this: I walk by the field, I see Ruvain flattening the surface. If he's flattening the surface for the benefit of the field, then he acquires it. That's a chazaka. If he's just flattening it because he's making a temporary threshing floor over here, then he does not acquire the field. So the Gemara says, hey chidami. Again, once again, how do you know which is which? How can I tell from his actions what his intentions are? That's what I want to know. Looking at what he's doing, looking at his objective action, how could I glean his intention? So Gemara says very simple. Hechidami shakal mulya v'shada benatza adaita da'ara mulya. So again, listen to this. If Ruvain takes the dirt from the mound and places it in the depression, then that ultimately, again, is indicative that he's trying to acquire the land. In other words, let's say that is a much more thoughtful and comprehensive act of land improvement. So you take Reuven takes the dirt from the mounds, puts it into the depressions. Ultimately, again, this beautiful shutfus, right? This beautiful partnership within the land itself. The mounds fill in the depressions. And that's ultimately, again, that's a sign that he is acquiring the land. Mulya b'mulya v'natza b'natza daita d'beidari. But if in general he just kind of does like a very cursory smoothing out. So what he just does is he takes the mound, right, and he pushes it down a little bit. Or he goes out and where there's a depression, he just kicks in some dirt from the side, which is clear. It's a little bit of a more of a rush job, not a comprehensive job. He's not being mishadech, right? He's not making a shidduch between mounds and depressions. So l'maisa, again, that's indicative that he's just trying to make a temporary threshing floor. And halacha l'maisa, he does not acquire the land. So we'll say it's the same theme over and over and over again. Chazaka could be accomplished when you're doing something of objective benefit to the land as a whole. If you're just doing something with the land to provide some immediate, temporal, or episodic benefit, then ultimately, again, that is not an act of chazaka. Also, just a beautiful, let's say, how do you acquire the land? How does Klal Yisrael, and what zuchos does Klal Yisrael acquire Eretz Yisrael? What is the schus? What is the schus through which we're able to hold on to the land? And the answer is, if the mounds fill up the depressions, and the depressions ultimately provide the space for the mounds. I'll say, when you think about mounds filling in depressions providing opening, providing space, what does that represent? What does that paint a picture of? Complete and absolute achdus. It's everyone working together to create a comprehensive whole, right? W-H-O-L-E, right? To create a sense of shleimus. You see, you look at Klal Yisrael, what do we have? When you look at Klal Yisrael, what do you have? There's a lot of depressions, and there's a lot of mounds, right? We're an interesting kind of, like, when you look at us, like we're a shtickle mismatched people, right? Like a child. Like sometimes we'll say, sometimes sometimes you walk into shul, and you're like, who put together this group of people over here? Like mamish, like what a random national chalent we are, right? Of just like people from different backgrounds, everything. You can never bring. Part of the beauty of Klal Yisrael is the random kite of our people. That's it. That's what makes us so special, right? Borei nefashos rabos v'chasrona. Chosh Baruch Hu creates so many different types of yidden with their strengths and with their weaknesses, with their mounds and with their depressions. And the avoda of life is that my mound should be good for your depression, and your depression should be good for my mound. You see, when there is no achdus, the land, the klal, looks pockmarked, right? It doesn't look whole. But suddenly when there's achdus, the depressions and the mound come together, and the land is perfectly beautiful. Through what zuchus is Klal Yisrael acquire Eretz Yisrael? Only when the mounds and the depressions, the different segments of the klal work together. That is the only time that there is true chazaka on the land. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Vamar Shmuel. Shmuel is very busy this morning, right? All of these are statements of Shmuel. So Vamar Shmuel, Hayman, the Pasach Maya Ba'ara, Adaited, so listen to this. One opens up, allows water to flow through a field. Same case, Hefker field. Reuven wants to acquire the field. So what does he do? He opens up a channel of water into the field. So if he's allowing the water into the field for the benefit of the field, then ultimately, again, he acquires the field. So the Gemara knows if the water is almost like an irrigation channel, right? The irrigation or water, you don't have to get, he's watering the field. So again, if the water goes through the field, then he acquires the field. So this is actually very interesting, I will say. What if he's just allowing the water to go through the field because he wants to catch fish? In other words, I will say, this is actually very interesting. Remember, fish obviously don't need shechita. So therefore, again, a great way that you could go ahead and get the fish without the exertion of fishing, of fishing. I don't know if there's any fishermen. I went once. It was a disaster. Man, it was a disaster. I think I caught a beer can. Right, that was so the Maisa. But the boat was wonderful. Baruch Hashem was good. So the Maisa, here's what's interesting. An interesting way to fish is if you have a body of water that has fish, you allow it to run through a field. Right? And then what ends up happening is the water kind of trickles out. The fish get left in the field. So it's a wonderful way to get the fish without the exertion of fishing. So if you're allowing the water to run through the field for the benefit of to water the field, then lemaisa, it works. It's chazaka. If you're just doing it to catch the fish, then lemaisa, it does not work. So I understand. Once again, I will say, we always come back to the same question. How can you tell what Ruvain's intentions are through his actions? So pasach trei bavi chad ma'il v'chad mafik adaita dekavri. Very simple. Let's say if there's two open. In other words, if the water, if Reuven allows the water to enter and to exit the field, that's clear that he's only doing it for the fish. Right? He's not, in other words, his intention is not for the water to remain in the field. Ultimately, at the end of the day, he's just looking for the water to go through it so he can keep the fish. As the Gemara says, chad bava, but if he's only allowing the water in and then the water remains in the field, so that's indicative, adaita da'ara. That is indicative, ultimately, again, that he is doing it for the benefit of the field itself. Incredible. A story. Hi esasa, the achla dikla bitefishcha tlesa shnin. So what happened? Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says over here, there was a particular woman. Rashbam says, Bitfishcha, it's about 10 lines up from the bottom. Kidarmina la'el, de pashach dikla adaita dechiyusa kulam chagisis. Listen to this. There was a particular woman who was utilizing a hefker palm tree. Now what she was doing is she was taking branches off of it. Now listen, we saw before, remember again, removing branches from a palm tree is only an act of chazaka if what? If you do it from all sides, right, from all sides. She, as we're going to see, was removing branches from one side. Now, the truth is she was doing that, the Rashbam points out over here, to feed her animals. But she was doing this ultimately again for a number of years. Asahu Rafik to Seipurta. Then another guy came along, and what did he do? He dug a little bit underneath the palm tree as a display of chazaka, because digging is one of the forms of chazaka. So now what happened? He claimed that he was the owner, because he claimed this woman who was utilizing the tree for all of these years was only taking branches from one side. If you take branches from one side, then it shows that's what you were doing it for the sake of your animals. Not as a form of chazaka. Therefore, this guy claimed that he was the owner because he did a real proprietary act by digging underneath the tree. So they brought the case before Levi. Okmi biadeh. So ultimately, again, so they paskin in accordance with the guy, right? The guy was the owner, even though the woman was utilizing this tree for years and years and years. But Lamaisa, she never performed the proprietary. This is very important. Without a chazaka, you do not become the owner. Chazaka is how you acquire something. So technically speaking, you could be using something for years, even under the premise that you are the owner. But if there was never a formal proprietary act performed, we're talking about on an item of hefker, so someone else could technically come along and acquire it. So that's what happened there. So these are all hefker cases. Obviously, if you pay money for something, we're not talking about that kind of case. So shtar for something, it's not talking about. But if you acquire something for hefker, excuse me, it only becomes yours when there is a chazaka proprietary act. So this woman was utilizing the tree for all of these years, but only taking branches from one side. That's not a chazaka on a hefker tree. The guy came along, dug a little bit underneath the tree. They brought the case before Levi, before Mar Okva, and they said, listen, it sounds strange, but Lamaisa, the guy is the owner because he did the act of chazaka. So what happened? So the lady got very upset, understandably so. In other words, she's been utilizing this tree all of these years. She assumed, and understandably so, that she was the owner. She was very upset. Amrullah, he said to her, what do you want from me? So again, Levi, Mar Ukva said to her, I don't understand, what do you want from me? You didn't do the chazaka. So if you didn't perform the chazaka, you're not the owner. If you're not the owner, somebody else comes along and does do a chazaka on technically what is a hefker piece of property, they become the owner. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I could do for you. Incredible. Also, a tremendous Musar Haskell. Also, at the end of the day, if you don't help yourself, other people can't help you. So he says, so what do you want? You didn't do the chazaka. I can't do the chazaka for you. I can't perform that. That was up to you. That's on you to perform it. If you didn't do it, Lamais, I'm sorry. There's nothing we could do for you. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. Amar Rav, Hatzar Tzura b'nichse hager kana. This is actually very interesting. So we'll say Rav highlights over here another form of chazaka. If you paint a picture, or draw a picture on the property of a ger, you acquire it. Now we'll say, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, Hatzar Tzura, Tzura schaya o of. So it's interesting. The Rashbam says if you draw a picture of an animal or a bird, b'nichse hager, the Rashbam says bekos le'abayis aval siud v'kir da'amar la'el ama k'neged ha'pesach lav hainu tzuras beria el tziyurim ba'alma ma'aset satzum u'prachim aval tzuras chayiv of chashuva v'dai be'echa v'lo ba'inan ama v'lo k'neged ha'pesach. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, sometimes painting or plastering could also be a form of chazaka, but you need a little bit more of that, a little bit of a bigger space. The concept of just drawing an artistic image ultimately, again, is demonstrative of ownership. So very interesting. The Rashban just points out you don't have to draw a bird and an animal, right? But ultimately, again, you're drawing a picture, a meaningful picture. So drawing a meaningful image on Nichse Hager acquires it. The Rav Lo Kani Leginsa de Beirav Ela B'tzurasa. Because we'll say, for example, Gemara tells an example of this. The Rav went ahead and next to Rav's base medrash lived the ger, right? The ger passed away. He had no relatives. Rav acquired his property ultimately again by going ahead and drawing a picture on the wall of the structure. So by drawing a picture, ultimately acquired it. Incredible. Let's go back there. Itmar, Sada Misyamis b'mitzareha. So let's say if you have a field that is demarcated with its boundary markers. Rashbam points out to Misyamis b'mitzareha, Sheish la meitza ba'aber ruchoseh. It has boundary markers in all four directions. Right, so boundary markers in all four directions. Also, you can see it, right? Like those, they do this all the time at properties, right? It's like the stick, with the little orange paint on top. It doesn't have to be a fence, but boundary markers. All four sides, we know what the boundary markers are. So what's the halacha? So Saddam Mesiyam Espezisareh Amarav Huna Amarav Kevan Shehekish Ba Makush Echad Kanakula. So both say this is very interesting. So Rav said that halacha l'maisa, because the field is fully boundaried and demarcated, therefore what? As soon as you put a shovel into the ground, you acquire the entire field. In other words, what we're pointing out over here, Abba says as follows. Chazaka doesn't have to be like a dramatic act on the entire field. But as long as you have an area that's demarcated, right, therefore, halacha l'maisa, once I do any kind of proprietary act, put the shovel in the ground, because it's demarcated, it's clear that that one act is devolving upon the entire demarcated property. Very interesting. Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Kevan shegishba, the chafar b'mara. So once you go ahead and you dig in it with a shovel, so echad haka achas bekarka kana kula dahainu rafak ba porto kigon karka shomi lecharisha ava bevais lavi chazaka velosh namecha velosh nichse hager kana kula. So we'll say, so first of all, just obviously when we're talking about putting a shovel in the ground, we're talking about agricultural land, right? In other words, if you get a house and you put a shovel in the ground of your house, that doesn't acquire a house, right? Digging acquires agricultural land. House will need its own type of chazaka. So assuming we're talking about a regular field. So the idea, I will say, is over here that because it's demarcated, one act of shoveling, one putting the shovel into the ground, that acquires the field. Incredible. Now, by the way, the Rashbam points out here, I will say, it does not matter what kind of case. In other words, this doesn't have to be nichse hager. This is any time you're acquiring property. So this is ownerless, something you're acquiring from Hefker, or for that matter, you bought a field. Even if you bought a field, you still have to do a chazaka on it, right? So however, whatever the case is, if you have to do a chazaka, ultimately, again, this is the way you do it. Fine. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Shmuel says, Lo kana ela mako makusha bilvad. So this is very interesting. So Shmuel says, no, you only acquire the area which you actually dug. Fascinating. Look at Rashbam. Lo kana ela mako makusha bilvad. The Rashbam says, V'dafka nichse hager, aval mechar v'kebal zuzi afilu eser sadlos be'eser medinos, v'ixik ba'achas, and kana kulan kidamar Shmuel perak hamay ba'okam v'gidush k'vidush Yisrael. So we'll say, so now the Rashbam switches over here. The Rashbam says, Shmuel's statement is dafka nichse hager. if you're acquiring something from Hefker, Shmuel says, in order to acquire Hefker property, you have to do a chazaka on every piece of that Hefker property. And if it's Hefker and you put your shovel in the ground, what did you acquire? What did you acquire? Mamish, the area that you put the shovel into. So we'll say this is a crazy machlokas, right? So according to Shmuel, essentially in order to acquire Hefker property, Hefker property, you mamish have to do a proprietary act like on every inch of that Hefker property, which is dramatic. According to Rav, as long as the field is demarcated, once you perform one act, that devolves upon the entire field as a whole. Amud Beis, 54b. T'shena misyames b'metzarel. So we'll say, so what about if you have a field that's not demarcated? Right? So in other words, again, we'll just keep it simple. The ger dies. We know that it's his field, but there are no boundary markers. It's not demarcated. Ad kama. So we'll say, so what's the halach over there? Amra papa. So we'll say, so now, let's go with Rav, right? So I understand that according to Rav, if I have a demarcated field, all I need to do is like one act, even a small act, putting the shovel into the ground, chazaka. That's it. Why now? What's the logic over there? Because it's clear that one act is devolving upon the entire demarcated area. What happens if the field is not boundaried? It's not demarcated. So now, how much of a chazaka do I need? So the Gemara says, Amrat Papa, Kida Azal Taira Dishvari Vahadar. You need to go back and forth in the field with your oxen. In other words, you have to plow the field, essentially 2 rolls of plowing from one end of the field to the other end of the field. Now, you don't have to do north, south, and east, west, but you got to do one of them. So you have to go back and forth in one direction of the field. So two lanes of plowing. Once you do that, that's demonstrative of ownership. So again, in a demarcated field, even one small act of shoveling. Non-demarcated boundary field, the oxen have to go back and forth. Incredible. So we'll say, this is a fascinating case. Now, let's let's translate it, and then let's see what it actually means. So literally translated, the property of an akum, of an idolater, are like the desert. Meaning, we'll say the desert is the paradigmatic example of something that is hefker. And therefore, again, because it's hefker, anyone can acquire it. Now, what does this mean? That a person can just go over to an akum and just take his land because it's hefker? Of course not. Look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says over here, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, almost right across in the Rashbam. So we'll say, listen to this. Shmuel is highlighting over here what is a fascinating legal technicality that, if you're not really scrupulous, could be potentially exploited. Everybody perks up, right? So I'll say, so now listen to this. Why? So we're talking about a following case, right? I'm buying property from an akum. So the case over here is, right, I gave akum the money. But I have not yet done a chazaka. Shmuel suggests in that moment, in that time, between the time that the akum got the money and I have performed the chazaka, technically speaking, the land is hefker, and someone else could swoop in and acquire it with a chazaka. Now, why is this? Why? What's the pshat? This is fascinating. My time, I'll listen to this. As soon as the akum gets his money, what does he say? I'm out. In other words, I'm done. Right? Hatzlacha Rabbah. Not an exact quote from Yaakov, but you understand. Right? In other words, right? I'm out. I got my money. I'm out. Now listen to this. Yisrael lokani adamati shtar liyadei. But the Jew doesn't technically take possession of the property until something happens. In other words, we'll say, right, just giving the money isn't the form of he needs his shtar, he needs his document, or needs some type of chazaka. Hilchach harehein kimidbar. Therefore, again, there's like this moment where they're hefker. And ultimately, again, whoever does the chazaka can acquire it. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's really interesting. Kimati is usually a day. The Rashbam says, Min al-Kech, Istalik Leah, Ovid Kochavim, Shekol Kinyan Shal Ovid Kochavim Bekesef. They both say, it's interesting that Ovid Kochavim, the only Kinyan, so to speak, that Ovid Kochavim has is Kinyan Kesef. So once he gets his money, he's out. He's done. The So we'll say, so here's the problem. So the Ovid Kochavim, for him the transaction is complete once he got his money. He's done. For the Yisrael, the transaction is not complete until he gets his shtar. The choshkim overcome the savel come anasim ve'in bedaito liknos below shtar. So we'll say again, the Jew is not corner the property until he gets his shtar. So you have this interesting, like in between area where there's no owner of the land, right? The akum is no longer the owner of the land. Why? Because as soon as he gets his money, he's out. The Jew, right, I'm technically speaking not yet the owner until I get the shtar. So there is this in-between state where technically speaking, this land is ownerless. And Shmuel says, technically, if somebody wants to exploit this, swoop in and acquire this land in this in-between state, it works. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, Whoa. Did Shmuel actually say this? Shmuel said, Dina de Malchusa Dina. Okay, we'll say. So remember, the Gemara says, 1 second, hold up here for just a second. We live by the concept of Dina de Malchusa Dina. What does Dina de Malchusa Dina mean? Dina de Malchusa Dina means, we'll say, our lives are governed by halacha. Right? What the Shulchan Aruch tells us creates our life reality, our halachic reality. That being said, whenever we are residents of a foreign country, we are bound by the laws of that country. Right? We're obligated. In other words, a Jew is never permitted to say, I don't have to worry about what the legal system says. I do what halacha says. Of course, I have to do what halacha says, but I also have to do what the legal system says. Dina de malchusa dina. So Shlomo says, 1 second. No malka amar lo likni ara ela bi'igarta. And the government says that land can only be fully transferred, ultimately with what? With a shtar. With a shtar. And therefore what? That halacha l'maisa, you can only become the owner of land if you have a shtar. Therefore, I will say, again, essentially the legal system prevents someone from swooping in exactly this kind of case. In other words, the legal system protects us over here in this situation. The legal system says that with real estate, and again, unless of course it's hefker, but in real estate you have to have a shtar. So in this case over here, where I'm buying from Akum, I've given him the money, I'm waiting for my shtar. Dina de Malchusa Dina says someone else cannot swoop in and acquire that property. So how could Shmuel say that someone can swoop in like this in-between moment and acquire the property? Amar le, ana lo yadana, uvda hava bidura dura usa. So Amar le, he said to him, ana lo yadana. He says, I'll tell you the truth. I don't exactly know how to reconcile what Shmuel said with Shmuel's statement of dina de malchusa dina. But here's what I do know. There was a story, right? Uvda hava bidura dira usa, right? B'Yisrael d'zavin ara me'oved kochavim. So we'll say there was ultimately a story. And what was the story? The story occurred, we'll say either the name of the place was Dura Usa, that was the name of the city, or the Rashbam points out it could also mean the village of shepherds. Okay, so the point of it is saying, I can't, in other words, the Gemara is asking, let's go back for just a second. Shmuel said that technically speaking, there's an exploitable window when you're buying property from an Akum, because there's that moment where I give the Akum the money, the Akum is out, but I have not acquired it until I get my shtar. In that moment, technically speaking, the land is hefker, and if someone else swooped in, they could acquire it. The Gemara says, Abai says to Rabbi Yosef, what are you talking about? How do you see that Shmuel says? Shmuel said, Dina de malchusa dina. The law of the land is the law of the land, right? Is the binding law. And the law of the land says is you cannot go ahead and acquire real estate without a shtar. So therefore, someone else can't swoop in and take this property from me in this momentary limbo state. So to which Rabbi Yosef responded, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know how to reconcile it, but I'm just going to tell you a story. This is a ma'aseh shahaya kachaya. This happened. What happened? So the Gemara says, B'Yisrael d'zamin army overcome. So in this shepherd village, a Jew bought property from an Akum. So now, same case. So the Jew paid the Akum. Akum was out. Jew did not yet get his shtar. While the Jew was waiting for the document, what happened? Another Jew came along, Asi Yisrael Achrina, Rafik Bapurta, and he dug a little bit in the land, right? And going back to what we saw before, let's assume, by the way, this is a fully demarcated land. So another Jew, Jew 2, came along and dug in the land a little bit, and what happened? Aslak Rabbi Yehuda. Okmi bi okma biada the sheni, and Rabbi Yehuda paskind that second Jew acquired the land. That's it. This is our case. This is our case, right? So Jew number 1 is waiting for a shtar. He paid his money. He's waiting for a shtar. Jew number 2 exploited the window, and he knows the akum is out. The Jew doesn't yet own it because the Jew doesn't have a shtar. Jew number 2 comes in, digs a little bit. They bring the case before Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Jew number 2, you're the owner. You're the owner. So again, so Rav Yosef says, listen, that's Shmuel's statement. So I don't know what to tell you about Dina Damachus Adina. I don't know what to tell you about that. But all I can tell you is this happened. This happened, and Rav Yehuda paskined that Jew number 2 who exploited the Hefker window was the owner. That's all I can tell you. To which Abai says, no. Amarle dura dura usa ka'amrit. Oh, you're talking about the case in the shepherd village? No. Hasam bagi metamri dahavu the inhu gufayu lahavi lo yavu taska lamalka. We'll say that was a different case. That was the case of, we'll say, apparently in this village, they were notorious for keeping land off the land records. They hid land. Right? Look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says over here, Bagi Matamri, it's about 4 lines from the bottom. Sodos Tumunos, Shalo Hayu Abailim Nostim Es Hamas Lamelech Ela Mavrichin Asman. They would keep the land off the land records. Now, why would they keep the lands hidden off the land records? Simple reason why. Right? Taxes. Right? Taxes. So they wanted to avoid taxes on the property. So they were cheating the government by not paying taxes on the property. Now the government says something very interesting. What does the government say? Umalka Amar, the king says, the government says, Man diyoev taska lechal ara. Ultimately, again, the government says that if you try to cheat the system will get back at you. What does this system say? If somebody is purposely keeping their land off the land records so as to avoid paying property taxes, whoever comes along and pays the property taxes becomes the owner of the land. That's the case, says the Gemara. So it ended up really, so I will say, like most things in life, there's more to the story. So what ended up happening over here is Akum was selling the land, right? Akum was selling land, but Akum was selling land that he was keeping secret, off the land records. Jew bought the land. Jew number 2 comes along, and what does Jew number 2 do? Jew number 2 pays the back taxes on the land. So the government says, okay, Dina Damachus Dina says, if you pay the back taxes on the land, ultimately, again, it is yours. That was the rest of the story. Seif Rabosai, what's interesting over here is as follows. So therefore, the Gemara is pointing out over here that the story neither denies nor confirms the statement of Shmuel. Okay, the Gemara goes right to a little bit. Rav Huna Zaben Aram Ovid Kochalim. Rav Huna bought land from an Ovid Kochalim. Asi Yisrael Acher Rafik Ba Porta. So we'll say same case. So Rav Huna bought land from an Akum. So we've already seen. Once the Akum receives the money, then what? He's out. He's done. And now the Jew doesn't really acquire title to it until he gets the shtar. So in this exploitable moment, another guy came along. So Asi Yisrael Acher Rafik Ba Porta. Another Jew came along and dug a little bit in the land. So in Rav Huna's land, Asla Kamid Rav Nachman. So Rav Huna is obviously upset. He brings this guy to a Beis Din. They came before Rav Nachman, Okmi biadei, and ultimately again Rav Nachman said, Halacha l'maisa, this guy is the owner, guy number 2. Okay, again I will say, to be clear, I will say, there are many things in life that you should not do. But if you do it, it works, right? In other words, this obviously is a very dishonest, and not dishonest is the wrong word. What's the right word? What? It's not. It's right. It's just not appropriate. It's not appropriate, right? It's not appropriate. Because at the end, again, is it illegal? Absolutely not. In other words, you're exploiting a legal loophole. What you're doing is absolutely legal. It's just not the right, it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. So they brought the case before Rav Huna. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. Remember again, a Beis Din, and this is interesting in general, right? Sometimes a Beis Din's job sometimes is just to say mutter or aser, right? Does it work or it doesn't work? So listen, it's bad, right? This guy is not getting mafter Yona on Yom Kippur. That's for sure, right? Unless he pays a lot. But Lamaisa, right? But Lamaisa, right? But Lamaisa, this is legal. Like in other words, it works. It works. What are you supposed to do? So the Gemara says, "Amalei my date." So I will say, so Rav Huna is not taking this sitting down, lying down, sitting down. Amalei my date. He says, what's your logic? Okay, so Rav Huna says to Rav Nachman, I got it. You're paskening like Shmuel, right? And what does Shmuel say? Shmuel was the one of us who brought to light this exploitable loophole, right? Shmuel's one who said that when you purchase property from an akum, the akum is out as soon as he gets his money. The Jew doesn't really vest with his title until he gets his shtar. There's that exploitable window. So I got it. So Rav Huna says to Rav Nachman, you're paskening like Shmuel. Well, why don't you pasken like the other statement of Shmuel? Top of Nun Hey, 55a, le'avid marki idach to Shmuel. Why don't you also pass like the other statement of Shmuel? What is the other statement of Shmuel? Damar Shmuel. Lokana ela mako makusha bilvad. Right, ultimately I will say, what's the other statement to Shmuel? The other statement to Shmuel is, what did Shmuel say? That in general, we'll say, when you go ahead and you go ahead, remember we'll say this was Shmuel at the end of Nun Daled Amud Aleph. Shmuel said that halacha l'maisa, when you're acquiring something that is hefker, and you put your shovel in the ground, what do you acquire? Only the area where you put your shovel in, as opposed to Rav, who said that at least in a boundary demarcated field, one shovelful acquires the entire field. Shmuel said one shovelful only acquires that area. So watch what's happening over here. So interestingly enough, Rav Huna is trying to at least mitigate the loss a little bit. So Rav Huna is saying, I got it, Rav Nachman, you're paskening like Shmuel. Shmuel says there is this exploitable window in a real estate transaction with an akum, but if you're going to pasken like one statement of Shmuel, then pasken like the other statement of Shmuel as well, and at least just say that this second guy, we'll call him Shmendrik, right, for short, right? Second guy, right, who goes along and is exploiting the window, he should only acquire the area where he's digging and nothing more. To which Rav Nachman responds. Amarle Bahai Anak Kishmaitin Svirle. Dam Rav Huna Amarav Kevan Shinikish Bamakush Echad Kanakula. So I will say, so to which Rav Nachman responds, I'm so sorry, but in that area we don't paskin like Shmuel. In that area, paskin like Rav, namely that halacha l'maisa, when you do one act of shoveling in a demarcated, boundaried field, that acquires everything. So therefore, I will say, in this case over here, Rav Nachman paskined against Rav Huna, and interestingly enough, the exploitation window works. So I'll just mention, so again, we're not finished with this case over here, but I will mention in the previous case, with Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, that Rambam paskins like Rav, that when you have a fully demarcated field, boundaried field, doesn't have to be fenced, but it's boundary. In other words, we can see what the boundary of the field is. One small proprietary act establishes chazaka on the entire area. If it is unboundaried, then you have to do something more significant, like the Gemara said, like taking the team of oxen, plowing back and forth. Now, about this exploitable window, so I'll say, so again, it seems to be over here that the Gemara is paskening like Shmuel, namely, that in that transaction with an akum, there is that window where there is no owner. The akum gets his money, he's out. The Jew doesn't become the owner until he gets his shtar, and therefore, technically speaking, at least this is how Rav Nachman is paskening in Mamishin Din Torah. With Rav Huna, if someone comes in and acquires that property with a proprietary act, then technically speaking, he becomes the owner. So also we're going to stop over here for today. Tremendous shkayach. What a start to the week. We'll get the halacha. Now again, I know I'm leaving a little bit of cliffhanger. Do we paskin halacha l'maisa like Shmuel or not? In Meretz Hashem, we're not finished yet. That'll be in tomorrow's daf. Shkayach, everyone. A good tavach. All right, Cham Razum, have a great day, everyone. Wonderful to see everyone.